Good afternoon. I'm Chris Scherer, Member Communications Director of the Society of Broadcast Engineers and the co-host of this month's episode of the SBE WEBxtra, the SBE chapter of the web. This is a monthly meeting usually held on the third Monday of the month. The SBE is the Association for Broadcast and Multimedia Technology Professionals with about 5,000 members, mostly in the U.S., but also around the world. The SBE WEBxtra is sponsored by Catrine. Catrine, unique experience, individual solutions, reliable performance. The host of today's SBE WEBxtra is SBE board member Kirk Harnack, who is also the chair of the SBE Social Networking Committee. Good afternoon, Kirk.
Good afternoon, Chris. It's good to see you, and I am delighted. First of all, it's a beautiful day across much of the U.S. A lot of folks are enjoying almost spring-like weather, especially yesterday, which was Father's Day in the U.S. It's a beautiful day here, and our guest reports it's a beautiful day at his place too. So I guess we all have to be inside to participate in this show. Maybe afterwards you get to take a quick jaunt outside. Paul McLane is our guest. Paul is the editor-in-chief at Radio World. Paul, welcome in. Good to see you.
It's great to see you too, Kirk and Chris. Thank you very much for having me. It's an honor.
Can you give us a little elevator speech about what we're going to be talking about during today's show? What will you be presenting to us?
Well, I thought I would give you a snapshot of the recent NAB show, news threads that I picked up on while I was there, the kind of things I was watching for that bubbled up on the convention floor and in the sessions. Look at just a handful of interesting products. And then afterwards, after I show you some slides and some pictures, maybe we can just chat a little bit about some other news stories that are, have been dominating what we do at Radio World every day, and that affects what radio engineers in particular might be interested in their careers.
You know, I've always thought it was fascinating, and we'll get to talk about it after the presentation. We'll have time for a few Q's and A's, but one of my Q's is going to be, how do you pick topics to publish about, to ask people to write about? I would imagine a certain amount of that is your own gut feeling about what people need to learn about, but that's informed largely by water engineers, water manufacturers, water engineers, and other technologists. What are they asking about? What are they expressing concern about? Or what are they enthused about? So Paul will be back with his presentation in just a minute, and we're going to ask him some questions afterward as well. Chris Scherer is back right now with our member update. Chris.
That's right, and this is your SBE member update for June 20, 2022. The next live webinars by SBE is on June 23rd at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. It's a new webinar series, Introduction to Successful Troubleshooting, Taking the Next Step. Dan Fogel, founder and former CEO of DNF Controls, leads the series. And then on June 28, we present Module 6 of the CBNT and CBNE study series topics, IT security. Wayne Pacina continues to lead those. Module 7 will be presented on July 21st, and Module 8, the last module, will be presented on August 9th. On July 14, we present Grounding Lightning Protection with Jeff Welton of Nautel. For more information on these and all the webinars by SBE, go to sbe.org/webinars. The next SBE certification exam window at local chapters is in June. The application deadline for that, it's this month. The application deadline for that exam session is already passed, but you can still apply to take an SBE certification exam during the August window. That application deadline, I made a mistake. I didn't update this. That's also passed. So go to sbe.org/certification, get all the information on certification, and I promise next time I'll do a better job updating my script. The annual SBE membership drive ran from March 1st until May 31st, thanks to the current 61 SBE members who recruited 68 new members. Recruiters all earned $5 off their 2023 membership dues per new member. The grand prize is a trip to the SBE National Meeting in the fall this year in Syracuse. The drawing for all the prizes will be completed during the SBE Executive Committee meeting coming up on June 25th. Also, the annual SBE compensation survey is complete. Thanks if you took the short time to participate. And if you didn't take the survey this year, I hope you will do next year. Survey results will be free to all SBE members. I'll give you one of the previews right now. SBE certification. On average, those who hold certification earn more than those who do not hold SBE certification. You can look for the full report coming in July. And that is your SBE member update for June 20th, 2022. Kirk?
Terrific. Thank you very much, Chris. And hey, no worries on not updating the script, because you can always apply for the next one coming down the pike. and that works out too. All right. We
Absolutely.
got yeah, indeed. We have Paul McLane here, and I have wanted so long to talk to Paul and pick his mind, pick his brain on a few topics. I think that Paul, as much as anybody else in our industry, probably has his finger on the pulse of what people are talking about. And because he certainly needs to publish this great magazine as often as he does. Every couple of weeks, I get a new one. Paul, welcome in. It's good to see you.
It's great to see you, and thank you very much. As I said earlier, it really is a privilege. I admire what both of you guys, gentlemen, are doing specifically, but also the great work SBE does. It's critical in our industry, and I'm truly appreciative of it.
You have a presentation you've put together thoughtfully, a lot of slides we're going to go through here pretty quickly. So I like the way that you put things in a concise manner with a few graphics and things to help us remember and relate to what you're talking about. So without further ado, Paul, I'm interested in seeing your presentation. Let's go.
Great, thanks, Kirk. And here's a quick look at what I saw at the NAB show that caught my eye, and an update on some of the stories that we follow at Radio World. If you happen to be at the show and attended the Nautel user group, you might have heard some of these topics, but that, of course, was at the beginning of the event. So if we bring up the next slide, Suncast, that'd be great. A big thing I was watching for at the show, of course, was who's going to show up. A lot of folks were asking that question because this was the first show back. I confess, only a few months before the show, I kind of wondered whether we would have a good turnout or whether we'd even have the show, given how unpredictable the pandemic has been. And I know there were several engineers who in the past would have never missed an NAB show, who told me that they would not come this year because they weren't ready for live events, or they were too busy, or they frankly didn't like to have to deal with the vaccination protocol. So will the show ever be the NAB show that we're all accustomed to in recent years, or will the experience of online events prove that in-person shows just aren't as important? You can't answer that question in one convention, but this was a transitional year without question. And I said at the outset, if the NAB had even half their normal attendance, the organizers could call it a success. And just being able to have the event, getting the industry's annual cycle restarted, would be an accomplishment. So on the next slide, we see that NAB reported registered attendance of about 52,500. That's down from 91,500 the last time before the pandemic, 2019. They met the bar of exceeding half. In any normal time, that a decline of more than 40% would be catastrophic, but this is not a normal time. And from the standpoint of everybody I talked to, most vendors who talked to me said they gave the convention positive reviews. They described a nice welcome energy among the attendees they saw, regular traffic for the first 3 days of the show, and the people they talked to seemed to be pretty serious. There weren't too many casual visitors. Not every vendor said the same thing. There were one or two that complained, particularly about the fact that radio exhibits tended to be spread out. There was no one cluster of radio. You find radio in all three of the halls. But the vibe was good. The international attendance was also down, but not as much as I might have expected. We still saw 22% of people from outside the United States. There were about 900 exhibitors, down from 1,600 the year before, but still a good show. It was also the first show the exhibits opened on Sunday, and we went through Wednesday. A nice welcome return for NAB show, and next year will be 100 years. NAB will be celebrating its centennial for the show. Next slide, please. A big part of the experience was checking out the new West Hall. I was anxious to see it. The convention was entirely in the central, north, and the new west, nothing on the south side. It is a beautiful location. It is also far away. At least it feels that way if you started over by the central hallway that I always would walk into when I'd begin my show experience. And there was no single concentration of radio booths. So if you wanted to go over to the West Hall and see some exhibitors there, you had to move back and forth. So if you go to the show next year, when the layouts will be similar, take my advice and plan a day for just the West Hall, or a day for just Central or North, because otherwise you're going to be going back and forth, and that's going to be driving you absolutely crazy. Dedicated day to each hall. Yep.
Paul, what's interesting, I think, is that even though the West Hall is literally across the street from the North Hall, it's not like walking across the street to get to it. Because you start a third of the way into the North Hall to walk to about seems like halfway through the West Hall. So you're actually walking a Las Vegas block practically
Yes.
to get
Yes.
from one building to the other. Oh my goodness, it's much farther than you think. Looking at some of the social media boards afterwards, this was a chief complaint. Now, I didn't mind it. I didn't mind the walk, and I didn't mind the, well, maybe you're going to talk about the Tesla thingy, but um, I didn't mind it, but I can see how some people would. It was a haul.
Well, I personally enjoy walking in my daily life, and I do it a lot. So I wasn't daunted by it, but I know that there are other people who don't necessarily have that, or who for whom a quarter mile or a half mile walk is substantial. And it is Las Vegas distances apply in this new convention center from one end to the other, and that wasn't even talking about the South Halls. So you definitely saw this. And the next slide I have here has a map. You know, the LVCC from end to end. It's just an unbelievable amount of physical space. Now, this map is from Las Vegas Show, LasVegasShow2.com. I forget the link; it's on there somewhere at the bottom. But the dark gray are the convention halls, and the south halls weren't even being used. That blue line is the LVCC loop, the Tesla loop that can shuttle you back and forth. And you can flip to the next slide. So that's the Elon Musk project, you know, and the LVCC version of it is sort of just the beta, so to speak, because they have big plans. But when you're in that West Hall and you want to go back to North or Central, you have to actually walk away from the direction you want to go to get to the station and then ride over. And a lot of folks just decided to walk. I took it once or twice. It was fine, but it's, you know, you're being driven around in an Uber basically underground. Now, when someday it's, you know, all over Las Vegas and there's no driver sitting behind the wheel, that'll be a different experience. So I'll look forward to that. Next slide, please. So the new NAB president and CEO is on hand, Curtis Leggett. He welcomed the industry back to the spring show after 3 years. You get the vibe from him that he's going to continue the themes and priorities that the association has emphasized recently under Gordon Smith. You know, a big one is that NAB wants Congress to pass legislation to rein in the market power of big tech platforms. That's a very important deal for NAB right now, and it puts it at odds with not only the tech companies, but with organizations like the Consumer Technology Association. The NAB also wants regulators to modernize media ownership rules to reflect what NAB calls the realities of the marketplace. So once again, pushing for deregulation of ownership rules. The NAB wants the FCC to recognize that the industry, the broadcast industry, to function in the public interest, that broadcasters need to be economically viable. So we can expect to hear more arguments from the association in their lobbying of the commission. Hey, you need to consider that broadcasters can't succeed at giving public service if they're not economically viable. And the NAB is still worried about that performance fee. You know, that's been floating around Capitol Hill for such a long time. That move seems to have some recent fresh legs on Capitol Hill. There's a picture of Curtis Leggett at the right talking with the FCC chairwoman, Jessica Rosenworcel. I did the first radio trade interview with him last summer after he was named CEO, and he's very much on the same wavelength as Gordon Smith was. Next slide, please. Many people listening to this will know that the FCC has been putting fresh emphasis on EAS and wireless emergency alerts. The commission decided last year that your state emergency communications committees need to meet at least annually, and they need to submit their EAS plans for FCC approval, and that deadline is coming up in the first week of July now. They're not the only ones working to improve EAS. In Las Vegas, the National Radio Systems Committee, the NRSC, issued a new guideline document that has best practices about how you implement EAS functionality at your facilities. You may think that everybody, that you know everything there is to know about EAS, but considering how broadcast infrastructure itself and messaging and digital radio and metadata have all been, evolving, it's good to have this kind of a guideline as a touchstone. So it gives examples of how current alerting infrastructure works, proliferating methods of delivery. It's a great overview if you happen to be new to EAS or you need a refresher. There's a particular focus on using metadata over FM signals, analog and digital signals. That document is NRSC G303. Next slide, please. That guideline, by the way, is not a requirement. It's just best practices. Here's a picture of the first NRSC meetings to be conducted face-to-face at an NAB since 2019. They had more than 30 people. Lots of engineering firepower in that picture. A lot of friends of the industry and of Radio World too. Next slide, please. Also on the alerting front, a venture was announced called America's Emergency Network. This will use ATSC3 next-gen television to let alert originators like the National Weather Service and Shake Alert send geo-targeted messages even when utilities fail. Why do I mention it here? Well, the network marries ATSC3 to the existing Alert FM system, which uses FMRDS in about 12 states. It's an example of new services that next-gen TV supporters hope are going to arise around the technology. There was a company, Tolka TV, at the show demonstrating the alert hybrid system that we're talking about here with a receiver dongle. Next slide. Not something on the exhibit floor, but on the minds of a lot of broadcasters was this move in Congress to make daylight saving time permanent. As you probably know, the U.S. Senate passed it unexpectedly, and as far as I can tell, without really understanding the implications. One engineering executive I talked to works for a group with a lot of AM stations. He said, "I'm not for this." But he said, quote, "The physics of skywave does not change when Congress decides to change the time associated with the position of the sun in the sky." And I thought that pretty much said it. There's been some talk of a standard 7 a.m. sign-on time if that were to come to be, but that engineer said he didn't think that Class A stations out west would go for it, let alone all those kids waiting for a school bus in the dark. We'll see. I mean, this issue may just very well die where it's sitting, but it was on people's minds. Next slide. The
Paul, hey,
NAB.
Paul, if I could,
Yes, sir.
if I could interject one thing about daylight saving, and I didn't,
Yep.
even though, hey, I'm a certified meteorologist, I should have known this. And I've always been in favor of, sticking on one standard. And where I live, if we stuck to daylight saving, it would be wonderful. But what I discovered was that if we all stayed on daylight saving in the U.S. in our current time zone boundaries, typically the northwest corner of each of these time zone boundaries, the sun I forget, either rises or sets at a really inconvenient time during part of the year. It seems, and my point is this: it seems to be that if we're going to stick to not switching, if we're going to stick to one time zone standard, we're going to have to redraw the boundaries a bit for the people in these slightly odd areas in the far northwest corners of each current time zone. Just wanted to say that because I didn't know how bad it could be for some folks.
Well, I can tell you, like, my wife works in education, and she said she heard about this and she said, "This is great. This is great." But then I explained to her what time she would be getting up, when the sun would be coming up and setting in the winter time. And it just is, you're always paying for it somewhere. It's not free. You're just moving things around. So I think there's implications to this, like you say, that would have to be thought through. I haven't heard a whole lot about it since that first push back in the spring. So, maybe it'll just die there. Interesting topic though. The NAB store was back. I think someone on this call probably ought to talk to them about selling shirts that say that on it, but usually they've got something for engineers that's a little bit more friendly. Next slide, please. The performance of all digital AM HD radio is in the spotlight. There was a presentation on the effects of directional antenna pattern bandwidth on MA3 transmission. So this was Mike Raid of XBRE and Dave Kolasar of Hubbard, familiar, I'm sure, to many on this call. They returned with more about their testing at WWFD in Frederick, Maryland, which, it's hard to believe, has been on the air in all digital AM for 4 years now under an STA. They outfitted the XBRE test van with a reference antenna, spectrum analyzer, and HD radio test receiver, and they drove through the station's null. And they took measurements along the way on field strength, spectrum analyzer plots, and digital signal constellations. And then they plotted those points on a map and overlaid the directional pattern of the station on top of it. What they found is that the MA3 transmission system, the all-digital version of AMHD, is remarkably durable with regards to dealing with non-linearities in the null. But because of non-linearities in the antenna system itself, you pay a price in the robustness of the reception. So their conclusion is that it's really important for a station that wants to switch over to all digital AM HD to pay attention to its antenna system, particularly if it's directional. It's important to watch for things like null fill and pattern bandwidth. If more stations pick up on this whole AM digital MA3, it'll become a more important point. Next slide, please. Ashraf Eldenari of Xperi received NAB's Excellence in Engineering Award. He's with his wife, Pam, on the left there. We profiled him in a recent cover story. His honor, excuse me, let me restart that thought. I was impressed by the fact, and I didn't know this about him, that early in his career, he had done spacecraft engineering, and it's not a common thing to move from spacecraft engineering to broadcasting, but that's what he did. He worked at the Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Lab. He was developing instrumentation in support of space research. Today, he's the Senior VP of Digital Platforms at Xperi, and he oversees HD radio systems engineering, certification, and standards work. Next slide. On the business front, Thomson Broadcast will acquire Gates Air. That was a deal that was announced just before the show, involving two manufacturers that both have deep roots in both radio and television, neither of them today owned by the original founding companies, of course. They announced an agreement for Thomson to acquire Gates Air from the Gores Group. The terms were not public. The transaction is expected to close in the second half if it passes regulatory approvals. That photo is from a conversation in the Gates booth. You might remember 10 years ago that Gores purchased Harris Broadcast from Harris Corporation for $225 million. And in 2014, that business was split, and that became Imagine Communications and Gates Air. So that's the Gates Air piece is what was acquired. Thomson's out of France. You may know it as the company that made the first live radio transmission from the Eiffel Tower back in 1937. And it had been acquired about 4 years ago from an entrepreneurial company based in Madagascar. The short story here is that Thomson's looking to expand its presence in the U.S. market with this. Next slide, please. At the show, Gates Air celebrated its 100th anniversary. We recently posted a fun story with a lot of great photos from throughout the company's history. Gates Radio was started in 1922 in Quincy, Illinois by Henry and Cora B. Gates and their son Parker, who at age 14 was the company's engineering visionary. He later would head up Gates Radio and Supply, which was sold to Harris Intertype in 1957. In this picture, Henry Gates is at the desk to the right. To his left and standing is Clinton Norris, their first employee of Gates Radio, and Parker Gates is next to him. This picture was provided to us by Janet Conover Gates, which we appreciated. Next slide. Well, everyone's been talking about virtualization and cloud, two unrelated, well, related, but not exactly the same concepts, and oftentimes they're lumped together. We've seen a real surge in discussion and awareness on this, and there's been important work being done by the NAB Radio Technology Committee, and vendors taking an active role in educating the industry include the Telos Alliance with their Container University webinar series. I think that's a really good example of the kind of educational efforts that manufacturers do so well in our industry. They're looking at the use of software containers and their implication for broadcast operations. Next slide. To that cloud point specifically, Nielsen encoding is being put in the cloud. EAS is being put in the cloud. Broadcasters are exploring putting audio processing in the cloud. Well, what else can we virtualize? And what does it mean for the design of new facilities and radio infrastructure? What's to say we even need the same size studio facilities? If broadcasters fully embrace these trends, what are the implications for localization? These are the kind of questions that virtualization brings up. Next slide. The kind of questions that come up are captured in an interview we did with Bob Orban, who told us, quote, moving the audio processing in and out of the cloud without dropouts, glitches, or unacceptable latency is challenging. Broadcasters must make a choice between the reliability and low latency of current hardware processors and the potential convenience of not having to own and maintain processing hardware. That's a concept I think that right now can apply to other types of equipment and other types of hardware that we're talking about putting in the cloud. Bob also said he sensed some backlash about the idea of putting everything in the cloud, and I hear that fairly often. But looking in the long term, it's hard to believe that the cloud is not going to be ever more an essential part of our radio infrastructure. Next slide. One example of how that's playing out right now was on the floor with the Nautel booth. Nautel has a collaboration with Telos in this area. Nautel says software can provide standby air chains, integrated audio processing, secure transport, and do away with the FM HD blending issues, no matter whether the air chain is at a studio, in your data center, or in the cloud. That was also the theme of a talk by Philip Schmidt of Nautel called A Cloud-Capable Synchronized Transport Architecture for FM and HD Radio. The company's doing some interesting work there, along with their partners at Telos. Next slide. That moves us on to some products also from Nautel. 10 FM analog models make up its new VX series line. These are in power outputs ranging from 150 watts to 5 kilowatts. They're selling it on their compact rack footprint, and the depth of it, the depth is only 20 to 25 inches. So you're not dealing with that awkward, extra deep kind of equipment for your racks. Control is via the new HTML5 AUI. The Nautel advanced user interface has been around for a while, but they've done a substantial update on it. The power supplies of these are hot swappable and can be removed right from the front. As you look there at the picture at the lower right of that slide, you can see the module coming out there. The RF power chain is based on a high voltage FET, and it's mated with a dual core DSP that Nautel says provides a lot of headroom for them to make future enhancements. These weren't shipping as of the show. The lower power models are expected later this year, and the 3 to 5 kilowatt models early next year. Next slide. We talked about virtualization, and here's a take on approaching this topic for broadcasters who aren't ready to put the entire broadcast chain in the public cloud. That was a theme for Wheatstone, which talked about a product that it says makes full virtualization possible without making that commitment. They call it Wheatstone Layers. This is a software suite that runs on enterprise IP services. The user can host multiple instances from an IT server for several studios or locations that's connected by the WheatNet system. They can also mix and control from a laptop or a tablet or another physical service. With this approach, you can consolidate several stations and studios into 1 or 2 servers and add instances for back-end mixing, FM processing, and so forth. This idea is replacing processors and mix engines and streaming appliances, and as a way to get into this without that full commitment to the public internet. Next slide, please. It's been interesting to watch Angry Audio get off the ground. The company started out establishing a reputation for interesting and thoughtful gizmos like a little fun headphone disconnector cable that they make. But the product line is getting more substantial, like in this case, the Chameleon C4 live stream audio processor. This is a processor specifically for streaming and HD audio processing. And it's just the first in a line of boxes that the company says it plans to build. The designer of this is Corny Gould. He's very well known in audio processing circles. And this processor uses a form of AI to analyze the audio and make its processing decisions. Most processors let you tweak and twiddle with the details. In this case, the selling point is simplicity. The idea is you just plug it in and you adjust for light, medium, or heavy processing, and you set your level. It also has precision loudness control, so you can set any loudness target from -24 to -14. This unit started shipping right before NAB, and the cost is one of the selling points. It retails for $999. Angry Audio is doing a lot of interesting stuff. Next slide. Processing was an active category at the show. Here's an advanced audio processor for FM, AM, HD, and streaming that incorporates Timio's software-based stereo tool. It has functions like de-lossifier, an advanced composite clipper by Hans von Zutphen, auto EQ, and natural dynamics. It's touch-friendly interface. It can be used from a PC, a tablet, or smartphone. Well, why would you buy the box instead of the software? Well, you can plug and play. There's nothing to configure. The firmware and the hardware are tuned to each other, so you don't have to deal with sound card settings and CPU usage. By using the hardware, you get protection against firmware issues. The box keeps track of whether the processing is running right, and if any problems are detected, it triggers a reboot of the system. What does it cost? Just under $8,000 retail, and in North America, it's distributed by the MaxConnect Group, which is Josh Bone's company. Next slide. I said processors were popular, but I mentioned a trend to centralization too. And here you've got a product from Orban that combines those topics. Orban says this processor is intended to help broadcasters and streamers who have high density needs, thus the name Enterprise. Optimod XPN Enterprise. This is a Linux-based customizable platform for controlling multiple signals from a single point. It gives you OptiCloud processing for up to 8 FM and 8 HD or DAB radio channels, plus 8 internet streams. So you've got a total of 24 output channels, and you use XPN Enterprise nodes to connect to the server processing platform. The content to be processed is brought to one location using your choice, AES3, AES67, SMPTE 2110, Dante, Livewire. And then the outputs can be analog, AES3, FM Composite, DMPX, or Orban Micro MPX. There's handy presets and less or more controls that make it easy for users to fine tune it. You see this theme through many of these products, that there's an attention to making it possible for non-technical users to use these products through their feature set. Next slide. Broadcast Bionics had a software offering that lets you turn any area in your facility into a content creation studio. They call it Bionic Table. But there's no table. You supply that table, and you supply an edge device like a Telos Microphone X node and up to 4 mics and headphones. And then you connect your laptop or your tablet or your phone, and you choose the utensils you want from the table menu. So that might be your microphones or your audio sources or audio beds or phones or webcams. It has auto mix to control levels, and you can record a session and download your recording as a stereo mix or a multi-track file. The output is a broadcast quality live audio stream, which is available over the network, and it can be made available to streaming services or as a file. The critical capabilities are being done by the Bionic software, which is on a machine or a virtual machine in your building or in the cloud once again. So this is something you would use in a breakout zone or, a corner of your home. It costs $3,250 per table if you want to buy it with an ongoing support fee, but you can also purchase it by subscription, paying on an ongoing basis. Next slide. Audio Science has a new generation of its streaming radio tuner, the ASI 2816. You get a look at it there. It's a multi-channel tuner in a single rack space, hardware is. It can be configured with up to 4 modules, and each module contains 4 radio tuners. So that's up to 16 tuners in a box. One module has 4 AM, FM, and weather band tuners. Another one has 4 AM, AM-HD, FM, and FM-HD tuners. So you can see the web interface here at the right, which allows configuration and monitoring of the tuners and stream settings. Nice display. Next slide. From DJB Software, a solution for internet radio applications, remote broadcasts, and podcasting. DJB Radio Studio. This is based on their Button Box, the infinite cartwall software that you might be familiar with. This is a low-cost item. The pricing was still being finalized as of a few weeks ago when I checked in with them, but it'll have an upfront price in the low hundreds of dollars, and then an annual license that's probably going to cost about $100 a year. You can connect 10 audio sources to a PC or a laptop or a Windows tablet to do audio podcasting or create long form recordings. It's got an on-screen mixer with VUs for each channel, and it lets you mix your local cartwall or your PlayStack audio with your external mic, your USB mic, audio interface, or analog device. It's got a scheduler in it, it's got a database editor in it, and it has drag and drop capability. Pretty cool. Next slide. Innovonics is excited about their new mod monitors, the 551 and 552. These are for advanced FM and HD signal monitoring. They snagged one of our Best of Show awards, in fact. Ben Barber told me that the last 2 years have seen great strides in the mod monitor work that Innovonics has done. And I think that's a trend we've seen with a lot of companies. There's been a lot of R&D work going on, even though the pandemic slowed down so much of the visible public activity with many of these companies. Next slide. This is the model 551 with that big 7-inch touchscreen that displays modulation data in a graphic format. And that data is also available via remote web interface. And the big box retails for just under $10,000. And then the Model 552 is a single rack version that costs about $8,800. Now, if you go on the Inovonics website, you'll be able to find that URL that I've got there on the slide. And you can get a nice web demo of the various displays with a real radio station. So I recommend check that out. Next slide, please. Moving up the tower, Dielectric has a new line of pylon antennas for use by FM radio stations. It says this is useful particularly in broadband applications where you have a problem with antenna loading. You know, pylons are common in UHF and high band VHF more recently. But Dielectric says that in most cases, these slotted coaxial antennas have been limited to single channel TV use because of narrow bandwidth. The company says it has solved these limitations and that this is useful for full band FM. And you know, the advantages include very low wind load, the simplicity of the design, so you're not worried as much about component issues, and a lot of flexibility for azimuth and elevation patterns. So we'll be keeping an eye on that. Next slide, please. John Shadler from Dielectric won a Best Paper Award from the Broadcast Engineering and IT Conference for his paper on this topic. And I should mention too that just in related news, that Dielectric had a big win at the FCC this spring because the commission approved a rule change that will allow FM directional stations to use computer modeling of their patterns. This is the first time that's been allowed. Dielectric and several other antenna companies pushed for that. Next slide. And just a few more to mention to you. We're hearing more from Q lately. Q and Xperi at the show announced a strategic partnership that they say will make it easier for radio broadcasters to display and monetize content in connected cars. They're the company that lets you send synced messages that relate to your content, including commercials and promotions. And the two companies will be working more closely together. In the past, stations would go to Xperi to deploy the Rapid technology. Rapid is the name of the technology. And then Q for content management and monetization. And now you go to Q, and they're like a one-stop shop for both of them. Next slide. Public Radio Engineering Conference was back. I wasn't in Vegas early enough to attend myself, but we heard good things. The president, Victoria St. John, told us she would have been happy if 30 people showed up, but they got well over 100. The organization gave its Meritorious Service Award to Rich Parker, Director of Engineering at Coast, Alaska, who was one of the founding members of the board of APRE and an active part of the public radio engineering community for decades. Next slide. And you know, the kind of things that we heard people talking about included hybrid operations. Hybrid meaning literally working some of your people from home and some of them from the office. You know, we have the word hybrid. It means a lot in radio, but in this conversation, hybrid, just, you know, what will we expect employers to do in the future when it comes to hybrid work? And I had a panel myself that NAB asked me to moderate with Sarah Foss, the Chief Technology Officer of Odyssey, Lamar Smith, Vice President of Engineering at Beasley, and then Brian Ulliger and George Molnar, two of the technology leaders at WTOP and Federal News Network here in Washington, D.C. It was an interesting conversation, but the gist of it was hybrid operations are here to stay. And it has implications as folks like this on the panel would say. You know, George Molnar said that at WTOP, just to name one small example, they're migrating to Microsoft 365 in order to provide in the cloud access and remote collaboration tools. And over at Beasley, they're putting a big focus on VPN services, multi-factor authentication, and really strict firewalls. So those are the kind of things we'll hear more about. Next slide. Exhibitors talked a lot about supply chain headaches, the impact on products, pricing, you know, and this was even before the last couple of months of inflation. But the last 2 years has really seen, of course, a lot of stress on the supply chain. So we're seeing longer lead times, higher costs to vendors that'll get passed along, and a new focus at manufacturers on buying very smart when they're putting their own components in stock. One vendor joked to me that instead of worrying about just-in-time ordering, they now do just-in-case ordering. Next slide. Here's a picture of Ben Barber reacting to a small box that Inovonics got that he said cost him $30,000. Next slide. And I'll wrap up just by mentioning that the Nautel user group was kind enough to let me salute 3 special engineers. And the first is Jeff Welton, who's been serving the Nautel community for 30 years as a speaker and a writer and a source of wisdom. I love that he gives lectures with names like "How Not to Blow Stuff Up." And I'm sure everybody who's listening to me talk today knows Jeff. I know Kirk and Chris know him very well. We congratulated him for having won the NAB Radio Engineering Achievement Award in 2020. Next slide. We also honored Jason Ornelas. He's a young man in his 30s that qualifies as a young man in radio engineering, and he's been doing some great work for Bonneville. And we honored him with our own Radio World Excellence in Engineering Award 2 years ago or a year ago. And then next slide, we also honored a gentleman who seems to be everywhere, Roz Clark. And you know, all three of these gentlemen hadn't had a chance to be honored in person. Next slide. So we had a handshake with them, and I also brought up some fun pictures of Jeff and Jason and Roz much earlier in their careers, which it was worth a chuckle there. So good time. Next slide, please. So I'll just wrap by saying that, you know, I don't tell you too much about Radio World when I'm chatting about all these trends, but we'd love to have you sign up if you're not already getting Radio World and our newsletters. There's a URL, tinyurl.com/rwmag, or you can pick us up on our website. There's a subscription button. Next slide. And we've got some cool ebooks too that we'd like to have you check out. They are free. We are coming up on number 100 in a couple of months. We will have published 100 ebooks in the last 8 or 9 years, which is a big part of my job too. So next slide, I think we'll say, yes, thank you. So Kirk, Chris, thank you for having me. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Wow. I feel like I've just been exposed to a fire hose. That's a lot of great information.
Well, that could be a good or bad thing. So I hope it wasn't too hard to drink from it.
I'm going to ask Chris to stand by because Chris was at NAB too and may have a follow-up question. I've got a follow-up question, and that is on your second to last slide. You mentioned ebooks, and
Yep.
I am working for one of the vendors, Telos Alliance manufacturer. Occasionally, we participate in an ebook, and I'm wondering. What is an ebook? How is it different than the regular issues that I get? Is it just a special issue, or what's the focus of these things? How should I think about one when I get one in the mail?
Well, physically speaking, an ebook is nothing more than a supplement that is only available online digitally so that you can look at it online, but it duplicates the physical sensation of having a product. So when you're of
Mhm.
a publication, so you're bringing up literally a page and you click these platforms that we use to do this and other publishers use. So you bring up the content and you're looking at pages that look like a book or a magazine, and you click the button and it turns the page. It emulates the print experience. But what Radio World uses them for is an opportunity to dig deeper into certain topics that are of interest either to engineers or to managers who are trying to understand technology. And so on our own schedule, we publish one every month, and we will do a deep dive. That might be a deep dive into, you know, what is MPX and why does it matter? What's the latest that's
Mm.
going on with digital radio? What are trends in the manufacture and design of transmitters? These are all topics we've done recently. We might have one company that will partner with us. We might have a Nautel, let's say, or an Telos, where the two of us together will decide on a topic and explore it specifically. Or it might just be a Radio World ebook where a number of different sponsors participate. But we always try to super serve the reader with something a little bit deeper. And then you, as a reader, have access to it. You go to a registration page, plug in your email, and you can open it up.
Gotcha. Okay. All righty. Good. I want to pay special attention to ebooks when I get notified that there's something available. I always make time to skim through my Radio World, but I don't always have time to read every article.
Sure.
But the ebooks focus on a particular topic or subject matter area with expertise writing the articles. Right.
Yes, exactly right. And it's some examples of what we've done recently. We had one in January where it was called Spectacular Radio Studios. And I just went to some of the leading broadcast groups and vendors and gathered up pictures and information about, I don't know, 10 to 15 recent studio projects and presented them. You know, we know readers love reading about studio facilities and recent jobs to understand how their colleagues have put together new facilities. So showing a picture of WABC's lobby in New York, or you know, a new Odyssey studio or studio complex in Atlanta. It's interesting visually, but it also helps us, I think, as readers, or you know, hopefully the engineers who are reading it, to understand what direction some of the technology trends are taking companies as they design new facilities, what kind of decisions, compromises, or efficiencies that they're making and looking for. So hopefully it's an educational process. That was not a typical ebook in the sense that, that was a series of picture themed little essays about various studios. Most of the time we're looking at a technical topic and exploring it. For instance, trends in transmitter design. We talked to several manufacturers, tell us what their chief engineers or their design engineers say are the most important changes in design of transmitters, for instance, and we'll talk to users and get their comments about what they're looking for in a water-cooled transmitter, for instance.
So looking back to the topic of NAB for a sec, Chris Scherer, I wonder, you were there at NAB. You and I got to walk around a bit together doing things for SBE. What did you have any follow-up questions about NAB for Paul?
As far as the time at the NAB this year, it was an unusual NAB because I didn't get to leave the SBE booth very much at all. So I saw very little of the show floor, which is really unusual. I always try to get some time on the floor and at least get a walkthrough and a quick browse, but I didn't even get to that this year, which was unusual. So unfortunately, my NAB experience was quite different than my past.
Did you get COVID, Chris?
Did I get it? No.
Because I did, and a lot of people did, I have to say. Yeah, I know a number of people that came back with it. Maybe that's just what we expect in the modern age of the pandemic, is that you cannot have a large industry meeting without some expectation that a lot of people are going to get it. And so for me, it laid me low for about a week. But you 2.5 years in, it's probably not going to ever go away. It's just going to be part of our life going forward.
You had mentioned about the Las Vegas distances and getting from even the North Hall to the new West Hall. And yeah, it's typical Las Vegas. Distances are much farther than they appear. You look out and say, oh, it's just right there. No, it's not. It's way over there.
Yes.
So I think the loop, the LVCC loop, or the Tesla tunnel, as became known colloquially, definitely eliminated a lot of extra steps. And it gave you the added advantage of once you actually pulled into the tunnel, you could tell your driver to punch it, Chewy, and emulate your own jump to hyperspace in your best imagination.
Well, I could be wrong about this, but I think the radio industry wants to aggregate on that exhibit floor, and I don't think many radio exhibitors don't like being spread out. They tend to cluster. One transmitter manufacturer goes here, suddenly there's three. Or, an Innovonics, which makes products that are related to your on-air chain, but they don't make transmitters. They want to be near the transmitter guys. So just looking at I was privy to seeing one of the next year's spring show maps as an exhibitor was about to pick their booth location. And it was interesting to me. It seemed to me that many of the radio companies this year coming up are looking at the West Hall and trying to aggregate over there. At least it seemed there were more. Whereas this past one, it really was spread out. And, if you're going with radio specifically in mind, which not everybody is doing, but that could be really just inefficient in terms of bouncing all over.
It's the fast food model chain that when one pops up, another one pops up nearby, and they end up sort of helping each other's business as opposed to having just one here and the next one 3-4 miles down the road.
Gas station on every corner.
Yep, exactly. So I see your point too, and yeah, it's hard to decide how to draw the lines for the groupings or what makes sense between company A and company B, and but company C is different but related, and it's a funny formula. But I think I agree with you, and I tend to agree in general that there's something to clustering them in a more centralized form than widely spread out over a greater distance. And I pity the company that might have kind of, hate to say it, drawn a short straw and been really in a remote corner and might have even gotten skipped for whatever reason, either not being seen or just somebody not allocating enough time. I think your tip about allocating a day per hall is a great idea. I used to do that as an attendee myself, just to avoid, well, even as in my second life after that, working alongside you at one point.
Indeed.
With Radio Magazine, where I would try to dedicate myself to one hall each day if I could, just to minimize the extra steps. Not that I don't mind walking, but I don't mind I don't want wasted walking. And time is, well, time is money, and we got to get what we got to get done. What we got to get done. So
That's exactly right. I mean, I just think one of the things that people will be keeping an eye on, I certainly am interested in, is what the role of the big spring convention will be going forward. And I for one feel they did a great job at putting this show on and getting it back on its feet. And I know from talking to the people working behind the scenes how challenging the last 3 years have been, and very stressful for the association, which relies on that money and had to ask its members for more during the pandemic to make up some of that shortfall. How important that convention is. But the pandemic has stressed every industry in that way. But it is such an important event. Kirk was asking me earlier how we come up with story ideas, and there's a whole a bunch of channels and ways that I develop story ideas. But one of them, without any question, is attending or looking at the conferences and seeing what the people that put them together think is important. And oftentimes that's what's bubbling up from the manufacturing side, where there's so much important R&D expertise. But it's also they've got committees that exist, advisory groups of engineers who comment on what they think should be part of the conference proceedings, and so having a recurring program of quality like the BEITC has been is an important part of our industry. So I was glad to see it back, even though attending conventions, it's certainly not my favorite thing to do. I mean, I love seeing friends, but it's a lot of work and it's be very costly, but it's important. So I think we'll continue to see the NAB. It'll
if
get bigger again, but maybe never to 90,000 people. You were going to say?
if you had said that attending conventions was your favorite thing, I would ask you to get your head checked, Paul.
Well, there are some folks who seem to thrive on it. I don't know, but
there are elements, I agree, that are interesting and entertaining, and I'll go ahead and say it, fun at times. But yeah, it's tiring. It's a lot going on. I think we're all kind of glad when it's over.
Exactly. But as an editor, I feel blessed because it is enjoyable to have my job at those shows. There's so many things to talk about, and there's so many interesting things being discussed. And the editorial calendar for the coming year, in a way, can get written in those conversations in the
Mhm.
aisles or in those sessions, and with smart people like yourselves, whether it's with the SBE or with manufacturers, and then with the people who are working in the field. I mean, there are some really, really great, smart engineers that are out there. And one of the sources that I have for story ideas and whatnot, of how and what we cover, are from that pool of really smart engineers who are working in the field at companies of all sizes, commercial and public, and I get to interact with them more there without having to really go out of my way. It's just presented as part of the show experience. So it's really good for us, for me at Radio World, to have the opportunity to rub shoulders again. Whether it's, I don't know, Conrad Troutman or Frank McCoy or Jason Ornelas. I mean, the list is endless. Doug Irwin, Tom McGinley are the people that help us officially with Radio World's content, and also just friends of the publication and provide that input. That's a convention benefit there.
Absolutely.
Paul,
Kirk, any
you answered all.
follow-ups?
Yeah, well, Paul already answered to some degree the question of how do you decide what to publish, what to write about, what to ask your regular authors to write about, or what are you going to accept from somebody if it seems like hey, this is statistically way outside the bell curve. I don't know if we want to publish that or not. We have standards here at Radio World, and so I'm just curious if Paul has any more thoughts he can share about this idea of being an editor, and so you decide what gets in there. Yes, I know you have an editorial calendar. There are events that drive certain articles, certain topics that are going to occur annually or semi-annually or biannual, whatever. But there's it's a I'm sure it's a bit of a two-way street where you get ideas from people or what people are talking about. Papers presented at the BEITC, for example. Would you talk to me just a bit more about that? Hopefully, kind
Yeah.
of organic process.
Well, it's a very important one and very satisfying once to me, once I got my mind around it. I was daunted by it when I first took a role in helping decide what was going to be in the pages. I mean, who was I to say? But you build an infrastructure of advice and commentary, and you lean on your own experience over time. I think I was lucky when I started at Radio World in 1996. I certainly didn't create Radio World's success. It was an established, well-respected brand filling an important need. But my philosophy of managing the publication editorially is that we want to serve engineers and non-technical readers who have an interest or need to deploy technology. Both of those are important. So we're gonna talk about technical trends, but we're always going to respect the history of the industry and of technology. That's important to me. And to put the people who make up this industry, the technical people and others, forward. So, you could argue that Radio World should just focus on products or on how-to articles and whatnot, and we try to have that in the editorial mix. But I want to have people. I want you as an engineer or a technology person to see yourself in the pages and hear your colleagues and peers and to hear their voices. Very important for me to have people who are in the industry feel like they have access to the channel. That said, that could also turn into a real mess if you just put everything in that is out there. So you try to hew to certain themes and find a good balance of what's going on and lean on those experts that I talked to you about. I mean, let's face it, we are a gatekeeper in that traditional sense, but the gatekeepers of the world have lost most of their monopoly on the gate because there's so many sources of information. There's so many places that the reader can go. And with social media, with many, many other free sources and paid sources online of good content, you just have to be as good and strong as you can and try to stay true to your personality of the brand. So when I'm picking out content, I'll sit down with John Casey, our publisher, who has great experience and understands the industry, from his own background working at manufacturers and working in music and whatnot. And we'll come up with general themes, and then we'll talk to those advisors that I mentioned and ask them if that holds true. And then we'll follow reader reaction and take that into account. There's a lot of different ways and a lot of different voices that come into the decision. You never know if it's right. And then occasionally you'll get a topic, readers will really respond to it, and you go, well, okay, that should mean that it's good to cover it. But give you an example. We recently had a letter to the editor from somebody who was very critical of amateur radio and the people who are on amateur radio for various abuses that he feels are too commonplace on the band. Well, it's not really a Radio World topic, not in terms of your profession as an engineer, but knowing that our readers have a great interest in amateur radio and knowing that there's a lot of overlap. Many people came into radio engineering through their enthusiasm for ham radio and are still active in it. So I published it. It was a small letter. It got an amazing amount of reaction from people who were deeply offended and took him to task with it. And so I ran with it. But you could argue that it's not really all that relevant. And then my argument back to that is, well, look, people in the industry care about it, and we're touching not only people's jobs, but also their passions. And if that's their passion and they see it as part of their community to have this conversation, then it's okay. I'm not going to run an amateur radio story on the cover of Radio World every issue, but I can certainly afford a page or two of that kind of back and forth to let them air that out. And so that was kind of eye-opening to me a little bit. Now, the people who pay for Radio World to be out there are the advertisers, and they probably don't really need to see a whole lot of amateur radio coverage in Radio World. They want to have their products exposed to the readers, and that's okay. That's a good part of what we do. Radio World exists to help bring buyers and sellers together. We have advertisers, and we love them and respect them. They're an important part of our industry. So we have to take their needs into account too, and that goes back to those conversations. What themes do they feel that we should be reporting, or how do we equip my readers to better make a decision about choosing among them? That's when it comes down to buying a transmitter, that's a big investment. So let's give them some tools to have that conversation with their manufacturer. That's a long answer, but there's a lot of different things that go into this decision.
Paul, that was very informative. And on the topic of taking cues occasionally or consistently from manufacturers, I think one thing, working for one myself, it's important to remember that if a manufacturer comes up with a new idea, new way, new scheme, new approach to doing something, on the one hand, there are some engineers who will say, well, they just want us to buy something new. And on the other hand, manufacturers are putting their money where their mouth is. They're investing in this. and a lot of manufacturers can't afford to be wrong. So they need that, they researched this pretty heavily before they jumped into it to do that. Before Innovonics, for example, made those mod monitors that they've come out with and started shipping this year. I know they heard a lot of customers saying, hey, if we build this, is this important to you? What else is important to you to go in this? Certainly, my employer does that, and I'm sure lots of other manufacturers do that as well. So listening to people who have real skin in the game, I think is a good thing to do.
Well,
Mhm.
I'm conscious of time here. Do we have another minute or two, or do we
Yeah,
need to?
go right ahead.
Okay,
Sure.
I think you touched on something important, which is that I believe our industry, this technology industry of radio broadcasting, it's relatively small, probably smaller than it was, when I started, certainly when I started several decades ago. And it's relationship based. So many relationships underpin the way that this little micro economy of ours works. And you, no one can afford, a manufacturer can't afford to screw their users, in this industry. Maybe you could get away with that somewhere else, but not in this industry. And I see Radio World as sitting at that juncture between the buyer and the seller and serving that role of trying to bring them together. So editorially speaking, my philosophy is if a company comes out with a new product or a concept, I want there to be exposure to that, whether they advertise in our publication or not. Of course, we hope they do, but I want to bring that to the forefront, and then I want people to have the opportunity to comment on it, and for us to follow it through its life cycle of products. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that it's too small of an industry to not treat people with respect, and we've had we've had a lot of success by partnering with manufacturers and by being open with readers about that relationship and trying to encourage everyone to feel that they have the opportunity to speak up about an issue that matters to them. So that's sort of my editorial philosophy.
Paul, and we're going to end on that. Thank you very much, Paul McLane, the editor-in-chief at Radio World, for being with us for an hour with an NAB wrap-up and a lot of thoughts about publishing and broadcasting. Chris Scherer, back to you.
Well, thanks, Kirk. This has been the SBE WEBxtra, the SBE chapter of the web. We present this monthly, and we hope you'll join us each time. We'll post the replay on our YouTube channel usually within a day. The SBE WEBxtra is sponsored by Catrine, whom we thank for the support. Catrine, unique experience, individual solutions, reliable performance. If you hold SBE certification, viewing the SBE WEBxtra qualifies you for 1/2 point in category G under attendance. It's just like attending a local chapter meeting. And that does it for this installment of the SBE WEBxtra from the Society of Broadcast Engineers, the Association for Broadcast and Multimedia Technology Professionals. Thanks to our guest once again, Paul McLane. And on behalf of Kirk Harnack, we'll see you next month.